And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson. And Andrew, it's been almost a week now since the NFL draft has culminated from Detroit, Michigan, and it was a very interesting NFL draft to say the least. A lot of interesting picks happened for some certain teams. Some of these teams actually bolstered their roster with some of the picks that they made this past Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And now we get ready for an interesting offseason coming up. As you know, we've already been in the offseason as it is, but now we get into that next stage of the offseason where we go from the NFL draft into training camp just a couple months away. So we'll have to see how it goes unfold, but I know you and I are both looking forward to how our team's directions are going to after their selections that they made this past week.
I have no faith, but I hope they do good. That's all I could really
Keep in
say.
mind,
I hope
folks.
I'm proven wrong. I hope I am proven wrong.
Keep in mind, folks. The Knicks had a very tough game last night, so that also could be swaying how we feel right now. We are not.
Let's not talk about that.
I don't want to talk about it yet.
That.
Hopefully, when we record our next episode, we could be in a better mood because hopefully by then the Knicks will be in the Sixers. But you were there in attendance last night, Johnson. I know you don't want to get into that game. That's why it hurts even more. But regardless, let's get back to the topic at hand, that being the NFL draft. And as I said, a very interesting NFL draft. And we knew what was going into this draft in terms of the number one overall pick. That was going to be Caleb Williams, regardless of no matter what the media was saying. Obviously, before Justin Fields was on the roster, that was no doubt that was going to be Caleb Williams going to Chicago. So the Bears get their new franchise quarterback. Hopefully that pans out for them. But then after that is when the draft really began. And, you know, it looked to be that maybe going into that second pick overall for the Commanders, that was the decision between Jaden Daniels or Drake May. Daniels, at going into the draft the last week or so, got more momentum as to becoming that number 2 overall pick. And he does become the number 2 overall pick for the Washington Commanders. So Washington does have a new quarterback at the helm with a new ownership, a new head coach, and a new offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury. So they're very excited to get that new quarterback after, you know, going around with a lot of quarterbacks these last couple of seasons. And who knows, maybe it'll work out for them. Obviously, for my sake, maybe it does not work out for them. But I know, Johnson, that was the quarterback you were hoping to be there at number 3 with the Patriots were picking.
Yeah, that's who I really wanted a quarterback. I think he's going to be the best quarterback in the draft. I've been saying that for months now at this point.
You have been.
It's not even like this was my opinion. This is my opinion kind of pre-playoffs still. So this is before college football playoffs. This is before the combine, before all the draft analysts got their thinking caps on. They said that he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks. I think he's a must. He's a can't miss prospect. And unfortunately for you, Nick, I think the Washington Commanders have just lucked into a generational talent at number 2.
I think if you're Washington, you're very hopeful that's the case. Now, remember the last time this situation happened, it's kind of very similar to the RG3 scenario where going into last season, you wouldn't even consider Jaden Daniels to be a first-round pick, let alone be the number 2 overall pick in the draft. And he has an historic season, wins a Heisman Trophy, and gets the number 2 overall pick just like RG3 did when he was drafted way back then. So obviously the Commanders are hoping that it's a different scenario because RG3 dealt with so many injuries throughout his entire career, unfortunately. Had an unbelievable rookie season that is one for the ages, but I don't disagree. I think if he can stay healthy, he's going to be very reliant on how Washington does with their offensive line in the next couple, years, because that has been a big issue for them the last couple of years. If they can fix that O-line, Jaden Daniels should have a very, very good career for Washington. But now we go back to the draft at hand, and we go to the number 3 overall pick, and that is your New England Patriots, Johnson. They have officially have the new quarterback, that being Drake May. Now, I know you are very indifferent about Drake May, but looking at your team as a whole and where you stand now with a new rookie quarterback, what do you think this means for New England going into the season?
Well, it's going to depend on if they start him to start the season. I am a big proponent of sitting your top quarterback, your top rookie quarterback for a year to learn behind a vet. A lot of great quarterbacks have done it. Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes. Seems to be a recipe for success. Jalen Hurts has done it. Jordan Love has done it, and they seem to be thriving right now. So I think they should sit him for a year, just kind of tank the year. You're looking to rebuild it anyway. You're not thinking you're going to win a Super Bowl immediately. So prioritize another high draft pick while developing talent. Play the young guys on the team. Make sure they get their reps in, and especially a rookie quarterback and rookie wide receiver, which we do have in that first second round kind of combination, could kind of kill both their confidence pretty quickly. So get a vet to sling him the ball, and they have him learn under Jacoby for a year. I don't see what the issue of that is.
Yeah, I think New England's in an interesting hold. I mean, obviously you have a new head coach as well. So it's a different, changing of the guard in New England. But as a fan that's been used to winning a lot for the last couple of years, I think this provides an interesting, motive and where this team is going to head in the next couple of years. And I think I don't really necessarily disagree with Drake May's maybe sitting a season. You have a very reliable backup in Jacoby Brissett that needing point could start the season, maybe even could start half of the games this year. And then maybe if, depending on where you feel like your team's going, maybe you start Drake May at some point. But I think New England's got a good future ahead because they have a lot of salary cap as well. So they can easily fix this roster in the next couple of years, which as a non-Patriot fan, that kind of scares people away. And hope they for non-Patriot fans that they don't build another dynasty in New England. But if Drake May pans out, that could very well be the case for this New England Patriots team. And we'll go into the rest of we'll talk about your draft class as a whole later on when we'll discuss our team's draft classes as it is, and then the rest of the draft as a whole. Other picks that stand out from the first round, especially in the top 10, Marvin Harrison went to the Arizona Cardinals. They finally get a number one wide receiver for Kyler Murray. Joe Alt going to the Los Angeles Chargers to now pair up with Rashawn Slater at tackle. They will now be guarding for Justin Herbert this season, so that
They'll
will be
have 15
interesting.
seconds in the pocket to throw to absolutely no one.
Well, you're not entirely wrong.
Listen, offensive line's important because eventually someone's going to get open. So I think they made the right pick here.
I think at the end of the day, I think for me, you can find a wide receiver easily. I would say more easily than a tackle.
100%. Offensive linemen do not grow on trees. Ironically, skill position players do.
Right. And so, I think going into next season, the Chargers will have an interesting wide receiver class. I actually like what the Chargers did in their draft this year, and I'll speak about that a little bit later on in the draft, and later on the show. But I really like what they did. I think Joe Alt was the right pick for them in this scenario. A lot of people obviously were thinking Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze would have been a better selection, maybe even Brock Bowers. But I think getting another tackle, solidifying at least your blindside blocker for both sides of the tackle is huge for Justin Herbert's development for the next couple of years. Yes, he might not have anyone to throw to this season, but if you get through this season, then you can get rid of some of the salary cap issues that they've had going into the year, and then maybe you can even draft someone next season. Who knows? Obviously, if Marvin Harrison was there, sure, they probably would have taken him at number 5, but we knew Arizona was never going to pass on him at the end of the day. They also needed a wide receiver. But another team that also needed a wide receiver was the New York Giants. And with Neighbors not going at number 5, the Giants would take Malik Neighbors at that 6th overall pick. Now, there was the discussion, would they take J.J. McCarthy? Would they take, Neighbors, or would they just go somewhere different? Me as a fan, I was hoping they would not take J.J. McCarthy and that Neighbors would be the pick. Thankfully, for my sake, that was the case, and they got Neighbors. We'll have to see how he does year one with this team. Obviously, Daniel Jones coming off an injury. He finally, hopefully, for his sake, will have a number one wide receiver to throw to. Now, will he have time in the pocket to do so? That's still another story to be determined. We'll have to see how those new offensive line shakeup does for the Giants this season. I'm still optimistic that maybe this will work out for the team, but I know better than anyone that this most likely will be a one-year thing for Daniel Jones, and then they'll look at the new future quarterback for Malik Neighbors going into next year's draft or even free agency. So we'll have to see how it all unfolds for New York. The other standouts from the first round, especially in the top 10, how about Michael Penix Jr. going to the Atlanta Falcons? I think the biggest story coming out of the draft since it happened, the whole thing with Kirk Cousins getting signed to a 4-year, $180 million deal, $100 million guaranteed this past offseason. Looks sure to be that the Falcons are going to take a defensive player in this draft because they've had so many defensive issues these past couple of seasons, and they went to the quarterback route, and their reasoning being, and a lot of people, they've mentioned it as well, that they're in the hopes that they will not be picking this high for the rest of the next couple of seasons with Kirk Cousins at the helm being the quarterback. they're expecting to be in a win now mode and be picking in the 20s, hopefully for their sake in the 30s, and that they will never have a prime pick like this again to select a prime quarterback like Michael Penix Jr. And I think the only concern for the Falcons is this really sustainable? Because Penix is 24. He's had so many injury issues his past couple of years in college. And your current quarterback, Kirk Cousins, is coming off an Achilles injury this past season. So I think that's the only concerning thing for that. And considering the fact how long is Kirk Cousins realistically going to be there for Atlanta? Because if you wait the full 4 years, by that time Michael Penix will be 28 years old. So I think that's the only head scratcher for this. I see why they did it, but at the same time, I think that it probably wasn't the best move if if you're in a quote unquote win now scenario, if you're this Atlanta Falcons team.
Oh boy, what can we really say about Michael Penix?
I
Maybe he'll
like
play, but
him.
listen. I like him, but he's gonna play by the time he's 30.
Right.
That's the main issue here.
I think the biggest loser for this whole thing was the Raiders because they were for sure hoping to get him at pick 13. And with Penix going at 8, it really threw a wrench in all of their draft plans. And you saw what happened. They basically took the best player available at that pick, which is Brock Bowers. But this is an interesting scenario because obviously Cousins wasn't notified until this pick, until maybe about the time that they were calling Michael Penix, or maybe 30 minutes before the draft, or he might have been even notified at all. And Cousins was hoping that, this was going to be a new, great thing because he's already dealt with having to sit behind a quarterback in years past when he was with RG3 in Washington. So I don't know where this goes for this Atlanta Falcons team. I still think that they're still not, close enough to being in a win now spot, but I don't know what they're going to do from here. And then the round at the top 10, we saw Roma Dudze go into the Chicago Bears at pick number 9. So
Still the draft, maybe.
I would say so. To get him at number 9 and pair him up with Caleb Williams when they already have guys like DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, that's huge for this team.
Well, position player wise, that's definitely the steal. There's a couple guys that went in round 2, which we'll go into, which I think is a way bigger steal now that I kind of think about it.
For the Bears, you're talking about?
No, for other teams.
Okay, yeah. We can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the final pick of the top 10, JJ McCarthy going to the Minnesota Vikings. Kind of one that we expected to go into this draft when the Vikings, had those 2 first-round picks. We expected them to move into the top 5. Things didn't really work out their scenario in their way. They would try to move up to number 3 in New England. Patriots would not budge. They wanted Drake May. So they traded with the New York Jets. They had a couple pick swaps in that deal, I think, and that one. And I think traded a 3rd or 4th round pick to move up from 11 to 10. They now get J.J. McCarthy. He will be battling it out with Sam Darnold this season for the starting quarterback job in Minnesota. And I think if you're McCarthy, this is probably the best case scenario for you to go to a team because you have already a star-studded wide receiver in Justin Jefferson, pairing him alongside Jordan Addison, and you have T.J. Hawkinson with a really good left tackle and Christian Darrisaw. It's probably the best case scenario for J.J. McCarthy going into this. And I guess it maybe gives Minnesota a slim chance of hope of maybe saying to themselves, hey, who knows? Maybe we make a wild card this spot this season. But it will all go on it will all really rely on how the development of McCarthy goes this season.
And
then
the next quarterback,
yeah, go ahead.
Skipping here. We didn't talk about Olu going to the Jets.
Yeah, I think it was another interesting move because I think we all also expected the Jets to take Brock Bowers at that pick. I certainly thought the Jets would take Brock Bowers. But this pick made sense. Olu Fashanu, get another offensive tackle for Aaron Rodgers after the injury he sustained last season. And, you could pair him up with Tyron Smith, or you can maybe move him into the inside of guard. That you have basically the Jets are trying to solidify that offensive line that has been very, very, a roller coaster these last couple of seasons, and it showed last year with that Aaron Rodgers injury just 4 plays into the season. So they want to solidify it to make sure Rodgers does not get hurt again, and gives the Jets a chance to quote unquote win now, because we know that's really the only scenario they're currently in right now with their team as it's constructed. But as you were alluding to, the J.J. McCarthy pick was not the last pick for a quarterback in this draft in the first round. Bo Nix going to the Denver Broncos at pick number 12. And I think this is a kind of a weird pick because Denver obviously was trying to move up and get a quarterback. It didn't work out, but a quarterback fell into their laps. Now, people are saying Bo Nix it was probably a reach to get Bo Nix at pick 12, but when you have the Raiders behind you and it was also, a team interested in quarterback, I think that's why they had to make this pick and get a quarterback. Considering also your quarterback room is Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson. It's never going to work this season. We already know the Broncos are throwing the season as it is, but to get a young quarterback like Bo Nix and develop him under a great mind like Sean Payton, I think is another good fit for a quarterback like this in Bo Nix. Now, this is a wild draft as it is because the first 14 picks were all offensive players, and 6 out of the first 12 were all quarterbacks. So this is a very unheard draft that we've ever seen. And it's the first time, I believe, since 1983. I think that was that draft class with Elway to Marino, where we had 6 quarterbacks go in the first round. So they're trying to repeat history in this draft class, and we'll have to see because, as you know, not all 6 quarterbacks are going to pan out. There's going to be 2, 3, who knows, maybe 4
Probably only
quarterbacks that
one or
don't pan
two.
out.
It's probably only one or two are gonna pan out.
And hopefully for your case, that Drake May is one of those guys that does pan out.
Like I said, I hope he proves me wrong.
Yeah. But was there any other first round picks that really stood out to you in terms of where they landed or if
Quinion Mitchell went way too low. He went way too low. I had
yeah.
him getting picked around 12, 13. He went to 22.
Yeah.
I mean, a steal for the Eagles.
The Eagles
Absolute
had a
steal.
really good draft. I hate to say it. Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean the second round. That's
the other guy. You just took it right out of my mouth. That's the other guy I said was I think maybe the steal of the draft. Cooper DeJean in the second round at 40 when this guy probably should have went 15 or 16.
Yeah, secondary was had a weird draft.
Eagles have set the secondary potentially for a decade.
Right, because they have guys like James Bradbury and Darius Slay that are getting up there in age, and they're going to have to replace them very sooner rather than later. And they pretty much did it in this draft alone. So
yeah, and they have great people to. They have great guys to learn from too.
Yeah,
talk about a good system.
Like I said, I think as a Giants fan, I'm not happy with the way the Commanders and Eagles drafts went because they both really had a good draft overall this past week. So that's very concerning as a fan, as an opposing fan of these teams. But yeah, when I saw Mitchell go to the Eagles, I knew that was, I was not going to be happy about that because there was a lot of teams ahead of them that easily could have taken a corner. But with the way the first 14 picks went, that's why this
it wasn't
happened.
Necessary.
Right. They didn't have to move up. They were trying to move up originally to take a corner, but with the way the draft was going, they said, we might as well just stay pat where we are, and whatever corner is there, we just take the best one available. And
if it isn't for Indianapolis, you don't have a defensive player taken in the top 15.
Right. Yeah. And I like what Indy did with that pick. Latu get a nice defensive edge rusher for the Colts. And they got Donnell Mitchell with their second round pick as well. And I really like that for this team. Pairing him up with Michael Pittman, especially with Anthony Richardson coming back from his injury. That's a nice get for the Indianapolis Colts going into next season. Any other first round picks that stood out to you? Or just maybe second, third round picks that that was a steal for some of these teams?
Second or third round picks that was a steal. I mentioned Kool-Aid McKinstry going to New Orleans at 41. That's another guy I thought he would have been 25, 26.
Yeah. Yeah, the Saints moved up to get him too. That was a good get for New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean another guy, Adonai Mitchell, going at 52. All these guys that we thought were gonna go in the first round, or like even maybe late first or early second, fell to midway, if not the bottom of the second round.
That sometimes happens though with the draft. You never know.
I do want to take a look at maybe Blake Corum out of Michigan going third round, pick 83. I think he's gonna be someone to monitor as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the Rams
needs a running back too.
I like that 1-2 combo, Corum and Kyren Williams. That's gonna be a nice 1-2 for the Rams in the next couple of years. And it was funny enough because they had their first round pick since Jared Goff this past week as well. And I like what the Rams did overall in their draft too. I think they were another team that came out of this draft, obviously losing Aaron Donald in the offseason. I think they did a good job of addressing their defensive edge and defensive interior needs while also addressing another running back for that running back room. But
so I want to talk about who won and lost the draft from a teams-wise perspective here.
Go for it.
Can I just go out and say that Houston Texans, big winners of last year's draft, are the big losers this year?
Uh,
Listen, I know there's
it's tough
Atlanta
because
and
obviously you
there's
didn't have
and
a
there's
first round
Denver.
pick.
There's
Yeah,
Atlanta and there's Denver, right? Who pretty much they had first round picks, but donated them to charity.
yeah. Trying to think, the Texans' first pick was what? Second round and
Musketeer out of Georgia.
Lassitier, right? And then they got I'm looking at it now. They got Blake Fisher. It's not the worst draft. I understand why, because obviously when you trade your first round pick, you essentially are saying you're in a good spot where you don't really think you need to draft as much in the first round. And I think this team is fine going
See,
forward.
that's where I'm going to disagree because I think since they're a team that is they have a plethora of talent,
Hmm.
they should have packaged those 2 seconds and got a first round pick.
They could have. They
They
could
should
have.
because they don't need multiple guys. They just need a guy. Does that make sense?
No,
You
I
don't
get
want to
it.
draft someone and have him on your bench. I'd rather draft the guy and have him get reps in, even if he doesn't start. If he's going to split snaps with someone on the offensive line in the secondary, they could have easily gotten someone like Kool Aid or Cooper DeJean with no problem. And
I think the only thing that saved the draft was getting Lassiter and Fisher, in my opinion, because you got Lassiter, who was another one of those corners that maybe could have made it a late, had the opportunity to maybe go late first round the draft. Was a standout at Georgia, and if not for Kool Aid McKinstry going to the pick before to the Saints, would probably have gone to Houston in that next pick. So that's another thing too for the Texans. They maybe could have gotten Kool Aid, but obviously goes to pick before them. Blake Fisher, I think, is a nice addition for their offensive line. And I really like them getting Cade Stover. He was a guy I wanted the Giants to take at tight end, and he goes in the fourth round at pick number 123. That could be a guy that maybe with CJ Stroud at the helm, they already have that connection from Ohio State. That could really be a good get for the Houston Texans going forward. But I don't necessarily hate the notion that they might have had not the best draft. I think
and
it really
bottom
depends on how.
five,
Yeah, I don't disagree with it completely. Them having a bottom five draft.
I want to talk about someone who's actually kind of interesting here, and that's the Saints.
Yeah,
They got Fuaga at
I
offensive
think I know where you're
tackle.
going. Why it's interesting.
Yeah, because they got Fuaga, they got Kool Aid, right? So they got their tackle and they got their secondary, right? And we can both agree those are two top prospects, right?
Yeah, I mean Fuaga they needed because they're gonna probably lose Ryan Ramczyk to retirement because of injury concerns, and they needed another corner with Lattimore. Cooley McKinstry definitely helps them.
Yeah. And they have Spencer Rattler here, who is 5 years ago, this was the consensus number one draft pick.
He could have been the number one pick. Yeah,
Consent. It's just he had some confidence issues at Oklahoma. He goes to South Carolina. He kind of shows out a little bit. He cools down. So he is probably the at least from his draft spot, outside of the kind of top 15 picks, the highest ceiling in this draft.
I think keep in mind too, there were rumors that Rattler could have went in the second round,
Yeah.
but there was some other stuff that were threw GMs off that kind of delayed
He's
him getting
also older
picked.
now at this point.
Right,
He's going to be 24 by the time the season starts.
right.
He spent 5 years in college. Uh,
That's why
really
people
not
were
showing
throwing up
out
like
until
Bo
he's
Nix.
22. Really not showing out until he's 22 years old. It's just it's a fluid situation. It's a weird situation, but
Yeah,
uh, if I don't know, if him and
I
Penix switch teams, you think you would have his draft stock right now, like back in when he was in Washington? If you
I
put
honestly like
Spencer
the.
Rattler on Washington, does he have the Penix story right now? It's something to really talk about.
Yeah, you can make the case for that because obviously Penix had those injury issues at Indiana, and then obviously got a great get going to Washington, and they obviously went to the national championship game this
Yeah, he
past
had great
season.
talent. Look at those receivers on his team too.
Yeah, yeah,
He had multiple draft
you
picks.
guys drafted one of those wide receivers,
Yeah,
Jalen Pollock, Polk, excuse me. I think that's a good get for New England, but I like the situation for Rattler going to this team too. Um, you say what you want about Derek Carr, whether he's good or not. That's still a good mentor for someone to get
absolutely. He's
your foot into the door in the NFL and try to
just bec-
learn under someone.
just because your body is failing you doesn't mean your mind is at that age. So he still has a lot to get back to the game.
Right. And maybe not a lot of people like what the Saints did in this draft. I think they had a solid draft overall, getting Fuaga, McKinstry, and Ryler were three really solid picks to me. Um, it can never really hurt to have a draft like that and get a quarterback in the fifth round that, like you mentioned, was at one point a couple years ago projected to be the number one overall pick and potentially win a Heisman Trophy. And obviously, things just didn't go his way, and he had, as you mentioned, had an up and down career at South Carolina. But I think it's a good get for the Saints, regardless. Was there any other teams that stood out to you, whether they be good or bad wise? If you want, or you can talk about your own team if you want to too.
I mean, I'm gonna kind of beat a dead horse of New England. We already kind of talked about Drake May, and we kind of,
You got Joe Milton.
we got Joe Milton, which kind of puzzles me. They said they
I
might turn
like
him
Joe
into a
Milton a
tight,
lot,
they
though.
might turn him into a tight end, which would make sense. He's, big frame quarterback,
I'm not gonna lie. I would
pretty
have loved him
fast.
on the Giants if they got a draft. He has a really good arm, but he could
They got
throw.
Javon Baker out of UCF, so they got two wide receivers.
Layden
Um,
Robinson out of A&M. I like that
uh,
pick too.
they also got Caden Wallace out of Penn State, so they got what they needed on the line. They got wide receivers. They got a quarterback. They got two quarterbacks in case one of them doesn't work out, so that's great. I know you want to talk about the Giants a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I'll get into it quickly. I love what the Giants did again. Obviously, I'm very optimistic that this will work out, but I love the neighbors. I was really hopeful they would get him for the sixth overall pick, and it worked out, thankfully. Tyler Nubin was a guy that I was looking at for the Giants again in the second round, too, because they have had safety issues, and you let Xavier McKinney walk in the offseason, so you needed another safety. And this guy's considered a ball hawk, a type of guy that McKinney just was his past couple of years for the Giants. So to potentially replace him with Nubin, if he can work out, that's great. Andrew Phillips, the corner out of Kentucky, I think is another good spot for the Giants as well. Another guy that a lot of people had ranked in the top 50 in the draft, falling into the third round, I think is a good get for this team. They got Theo Johnson from Penn State, a good blocking tight end that maybe could be the starting tight end of this team in a couple years when Darren, because you never know the status of Darren Waller is at this point. He could retire before the season even starts, so wouldn't be shocked that Theo Johnson maybe gets some first rep tight end reps this season. We'll have to see. And the last pick I really liked was Tyron Tracy out of Purdue. This is a guy that people are saying that maybe if pans out correctly, could be the starting running back for this team in a couple of seasons. Now, I probably said that last year with Eric Gray when he got the Giants drafted him out of Oklahoma. And again, I was optimistic for him as well. But they're saying that Tracy really could be that type of player. He's a former wide receiver. He's a good pass catcher as well from the Boilermakers. And I think if you're going to go to a system that works out for your favor, it's Brian Dable's system because he likes to have pass catching running backs in this system. You got a guy like Devin Singletary that easily for the Giants can mentor a guy like Tyrone Tracy to be maybe that starting running back in the next couple of years for the Giants. So I really like what this team did. I think a lot of people look at the Giants and said, not a bad draft. You didn't really, you didn't bite the bullet and take a quarterback, which a lot of people thought they were going to. And you finally got, hopefully for your sake, a true number one wide receiver that they haven't had since Odell left. So I'm very optimistic, but I'm not going to, oversense my theory of how this is going to go for the Giants going to next season. If I had to pick, regardless, though, other than the Giants, if I had to pick my best and worst draft class from this season, if I had to pick my best one, I would say
Chicago, right?
I don't even think it's Chicago. I looked at two teams for me that I really love what they did in the draft. I love what the Cardinals did in the draft. You got Marvin Harrison, Darius Robinson, another strong defensive end that could play defensive tackle.
They just drafted too many players, though. They can't roster all these guys.
Right. I'm not. You don't have to roster all of them. I just love what they did with, let's say, their first 5 or 4 picks. I loved Harrison. I love Robinson. Max Melton was a guy I wanted the Giants to get. If they didn't get Andrew Phillips, I wanted Max Melton on the Giants. You even know I said it on night 2. I said if the Giants draft Max Melton, I posted the Tony Soprano meme of him holding a football with a Rutgers jacket on because I really wanted that to happen. And unfortunately, that did not go the way I wanted it to go. And I really love the Trey Benson pick, the running back out of Florida State. I think the Cardinals have not had a good running quarterback, running back, excuse me, for years. I couldn't even name you the last time they've had a good running back on this team. And I think Trey Benson could be that guy for them the next couple of years. You're going into a system that obviously you have a good running quarterback in Kyler Murray. Now you'll have a number one wide receiver in Marvin Harrison. Not right now is definitely not the time for the Cardinals, but I say give it a year or two, and I think not a year or two, maybe give it 2 or 3 years, and the Cardinals could have a very explosive offense in the NFL. If not for that, though, I think the Steelers probably had the best draft in my opinion. Love Troy Fatanu. I love Zach Frazier. I know they wanted Jackson Powers Johnson, but he went before that to the Raiders, so they settled for Zach Frazier, which is still a very good get for them. I liked Roman Wilson a lot going into this team. And Peyton Wilson, the linebacker out of NC State, who a lot of people had going in maybe the late first round, early second round, but because of injury concerns, fell to the third round. And the main goal for the Steelers right now is fixing that offensive line. And obviously, when you have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as your quarterbacks, they're both on 1 year deals. You're trying to figure out who's going to be the starting quarterback for the next couple of years. Most likely it would be Fields in that scenario. But to get Fatano and Frazier was huge because those are two guys that immediately can be day one stars for the Steelers going into this upcoming season. And Roman Wilson could easily be that slot receiver for Pittsburgh. We saw what he did in Michigan. You and I both saw how vital he was to JJ McCarthy whenever they needed to throw the ball. He was pretty much the number one target for that offense when they had to throw it on third and long situations. So to get him to pair him with George Pickens on this team, I love what the Steelers did in this draft, I think, as a whole. If not for maybe, I guess a lot of people think the Bears had the best draft, in my opinion, but in their opinions, I should say, I still think the Steelers had the best one overall, just because of what they were able to do and plug in players that could be easily day one stars for now. And quickly, for my worst draft, I would it's very easy to say Atlanta because no one really understands the pick at number one. If I had to pick a team after that, maybe that does that now people like maybe the Jags. I Brian Thomas Jr. is a fine pick to get, replace Calvin Ridley. The rest of the draft, I wasn't sure of what they were doing. And I feel like they've had a lot of offensive line issues, which is why I'm, weirded by why they didn't take one in the second or third round. They eventually took one in the fourth round, but that's been a huge issue for them these last couple of years. And you have a quarterback in Trevor Lawrence where people are starting to question him being, is he a good quarterback or not? And I know you have questioned him a lot this last year or two. And I don't know. I don't know about Jacksonville. That could be the Tony Khan hate that I have in him, and this for the.
I mean,
For
listen, I
that,
started
but
questioning him
I think
before it
it's
got
not a great
popular.
draft. Yeah, you did. You did.
I was saying beginning of last year, let's say, hey, maybe this isn't the guy.
Well, they're
And
hoping because if not, then that entire 2021 class is going to go down in history as the worst
it goes
QB
down in
class.
infamy.
Yeah, I think it's already going down in infamy, but it could be worse if Trevor Lawrence were to get, let's say, traded because everyone else has been traded in that draft class.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, so we'll see. I think the draft as a whole was a solid one. I'm not sure how these teams will do. Like I said, I think this is probably the most unpredictable draft and we've had in a while, just because. Yes, the first 7 picks weren't dealt. Everyone stayed pat where they were, but after pick 8 is kind of where things like picked up, because then you saw Penix go, you saw McCarthy go, you saw Bo Nix go. Then we had some teams trading. The Vikings traded up twice. We saw the Eagles getting Quinion Mitchell. They made 8 trades in the entire draft as a whole. That tied an NFL record for most draft day trades. So things were very busy during the NFL draft, but I would say overall it was a very good one, to say the least. But before we wrap up today's show, Johnson, any final thoughts on this draft, or maybe any final thoughts for your Patriots going into training camp the next couple weeks?
Oh boy. I hope I am wrong. I hope they have a good draft. I hope they pick the right players. I hope they all are big successes.
Yep.
And that's all I hope Bob Kraft kind of sticks his nose out of business. I hope he keeps his nose out of things.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really hoping for.
I'm hoping the same for John Mara because I feel like it's been an issue for the Giants the last couple of years. But don't disagree with that necessarily. I hope for the Giants' sake that Neighbors works out perfectly. And if Jones is not the quarterback, then oh well, cut him after the season and move on and find a new quarterback, whether that be in the draft or in free agency. But you and I both have to be optimistic regardless. We have no other choice but to be optimistic with these teams because we just had a very tough 2023-2024 season. So we'll have to see how it all unfolds. But hopefully for our sake, Johnson, going into next week's show, we are in a better mood with the Knicks. We still have 2 games left, one tomorrow, one on Saturday. Hopefully tomorrow is
allegedly 2 games. Right now there's only one.
You're right. Allegedly 2 games. We will recap the NBA first round next week here on the show. And like I said, hopefully Johnson and I are in a good mood. And maybe we can say some bing bongs when we're doing that on next week's show. So you have to tune in and find out what the results of the NBA first round are next week here on the All Gas No Break Sports Show. But as for this week, that will do it for this week's edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. The NFL draft has been concluded, and now we move into another type of offseason for the NFL. We'll have to wait a few weeks to see how training camp will unfold for these NFL teams and how will these prospects that were just drafted will pan out for these teams going into training camp, into the preseason, and then eventually into the regular season. So we'll have to see how it all unfolds. This has been Nicholas Bavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson with the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your week.